In the late 1980s, a couple of journeymen were assigned to work here in Nairobi. They were actually overseeing a building project, but in their spare time they started a ministry among children, a backyard Bible club, turned into a prayer meeting for parents. Eventually it became a church. I had the privilege this morning of worshiping with the church that grew out of that congregation. This church is amazing. There were about 600 people in the building today, maybe 700, but they've also invested in training up church planters and starting new churches around the community. They want to pay forward what they've learned. They have sponsored new work throughout the city and throughout the country of Kenya. In today's session, we're going to be talking about the importance of a sponsored church. What are the responsibilities and how do you make sure that the relationship goes well? One of the most important elements in church planting is having a good sponsor. That's what we'll be looking at today. In today's session in church planting, we're going to be continuing our unit on elements of church planting. We're going to be talking about the role of the sponsor church, sometimes called the mother church, sometimes called the sending church, but we're going to be talking about the role of the church that sends out the worker, the church planter, and how they relate to the project of planting a new congregation. We're going to be considering two different aspects. What does that look like in an international church planting setting? And what does that look like in a domestic church planting setting? So first, let's consider mission church relations in international church planting. Harold Fuller, in his book Mission Church Dynamics, talks about 4 stages in the relationship between the mission and the sending church, or the country of origin church. The first stage is the pioneer stage. This would be the work that takes place before a national church exists. So when the missionaries first get into the community, some of the language that he uses is a little bit dated and talks about nations sending missionaries to another nation. Now we're more likely to talk about people groups. So as a mission sending agency enters into a new people group in the pioneer stage, there is no church in that people group. And so all of the work has to be done by that cross-cultural outside worker. In the second stage, it's a parental stage. Missionaries will lead the church and train nationals for leadership. As would be evident from the name parental stage, at this stage it's very, very easy to slip into paternalism, to have the missionary consider themselves to be the parent, to be the expert, to be the father, and so they sometimes can be very controlling. So it's an essential stage when the missionary first goes into the people group that they're going to be in charge because there is no one else. But it has to be done very carefully so that the missionary doesn't assume a role that they should not have and keep that authority for too long. A good way to avoid this happening, this paternalism developing in the parental stage, is to do what we call shadow pastoring, meaning always putting the national person in front and having them come back to the missionary for advice, but that they are the national or the insider, the person from within the people group, is the face of leadership. That can kind of keep that paternalism from sneaking in while the nationals are being trained for leadership. The third stage is the partnership stage. At this stage, the missionaries and the nationals are working side by side as equals. They are making decisions collectively, they are considering each other's perspective, and they are partners in the work. And then finally, there is the participation stage, when missionaries are serving under the direction of the national church and doing what they are asked to do by those who are leading the national convention or the church among the people group. Some people would say at this point the role of the missionary is no longer apostolic. They're no longer going out and starting new work. Some have said that at this point the missionary participation needs to cease to exist, and the missionary needs to go to a new place where they can be in the pioneer stage role. Others would argue that it's very important to maintain a relationship during this participation stage to help strengthen the church, to lend insight into theological education, the development of leadership training, and the continued growth of the maturity of the national church. Either way, at some point it's going to become necessary for the missionaries to transition out of leadership and for the national church or the insider people from within that people group to take the role of leadership for themselves. And And so Dr. Mark Terry, Professor Emeritus here at Mid-America Baptist Theological Seminary, has given some principles for phase out that I think are very good. What can the missionary have in mind from the very beginning as they enter into a people group to begin a church planting movement or a church planting strategy so that they will be able to step out at the appropriate time? The first principle is to begin with the end in mind. Know that the role of the missionary is going to be changing through the different stages, and that the missionary is going to be constantly looking at ways to give away authority. Sometimes we say we are there to work ourselves out of a job. So begin with that end in mind. Walk in on day one saying, how can I make myself unnecessary in this situation? Give national believers as much responsibility as possible, as soon as possible. Don't wait until someone has all of the perfect characteristics in place. If we waited till someone was perfect, we would never hand over authority. And if we were honest with ourselves, we would never be in ministry ourselves because we are not perfect. So waiting until someone is perfectly prepared means we're never going to hand over that responsibility. That doesn't mean throw them to the lions, but even from the very second or third week, you can ask someone, hey, would you lead us in prayer? The missionary doesn't have to do all of that. Or you can give someone, here's some questions to ask as we go through the Bible study. Why don't you ask the questions and I'll just be here if you need any help. But as quickly as possible, give as much responsibility as possible. Begin handing that off to the national or local believers. Teach congregational decision making rather than saying, here's what we've decided to do. Whenever you raise funds, we're going to spend it this way. As the congregation takes up an offering, ask them, so God has given you this money. How does he want you to spend it? And allow them to discuss and make those decisions. Where is the next place we should go to start another church among your people? Let them discuss and be involved in that conversation. Emphasize leadership training. Always help people to continue to grow in their following of Jesus Christ, understanding the ways that he has gifted them, knowing what he is calling them to do, and train them to do the different roles within the church and within the ministry, teaching them how to do what is expected of them. Start missions-minded churches. That seems like that would be obvious, but very often it is not. Frequently, missionaries bring to the people group the understanding that these people are the ends of the earth and that they need to learn how to receive missions dollars and how to receive mission workers. But we need to, if we're going to begin with the end in mind, we need to start missions-minded churches where we are convincing them, helping them to see they are Jerusalem and God is calling them to bring the gospel to the ends of the earth. So how from day one can they have a global vision, praying about how God would use them to bring the gospel to other peoples and other places? Plant clusters of churches that can work together, that can form some kind of an association or network where they realize that this one church is not the only church, but that we're part of something larger and that we need to develop stages of leadership to help this work continue. And then finally, don't get bogged down in church development. Be apostolic, continually going to the edge, continually going to new peoples and new places so that the church can continue to expand. So those are some thoughts of the role of the sponsoring organization in international church planting. But what about the traditional domestic church planting situation where a sending church is going to help start a new church across town or in another part of the county? What does it look like when you're providing for a new church plant nearby? The first thing that the church needs to provide is prayer. In the same article that we looked at yesterday by Mac Lake, he identified 6 things a sending church should provide. The first thing a sending church should provide is prayer. They should engage their congregation in praying for the church planter, for his family, for the specific needs of the church plant, praying for the lost in the community. It would be excellent if the sponsoring church or sending church could do prayer walking in the community where the new church is going to be planted, and so that all of the members of the church could become involved in the work that is going to be done. Second, there needs to be encouragement. The sending church will find tangible ways to encourage the church planter and their spouse, maybe sending them to a retreat, giving them just a gift card to go out for dinner and spend some time focused on themselves, making sure that they do not feel alone or unsupported in the journey. Just being a voice of you can do this and we're praying for you and we have your back, not just saying those words, but actually demonstrating that they are available to help. Sending Church can provide mentoring. During the church planters training, the senior pastor or other people on the staff can provide monthly coaching, encouraging the church planter as they grow in their confidence in this new ministry. It would be best if those who are providing the mentoring have actually had experience in church planting and understand what is going on in that situation. But if that's not possible, just a pastor helping know, how do you get ready for every service every Sunday? And how do you continue to counsel people who are having problems? Let me go with you and show you how we can share the gospel, but taking them and encouraging them step by step in the work. Ascending Church can provide field support, meaning providing mission teams to help the church planter in serving their community if there's going to be an evangelistic push. If you're starting a new church, you probably don't have a lot of church members to go with you, to go out and to invite the community to an outreach activity, or to go door to door sharing the gospel, or to fill all of the needs for Sunday school training. So having all of this come from the sending church can be very helpful, as well as having financial support coming from the sending church. Giving financially to the church plant through their regular budget or through special offerings to help meet the financial needs of the new congregation. And then finally, a sending church can provide networking. When possible, the sending church will help the church planter make significant connections with others, introduce them to the people who work for the association or the state convention or other pastors in the community who might be willing to be partners in this new church plant, but being involved and helping in the work as it gets off of the ground. When working with a sponsor church or a sending church or a mother church, it would be important to establish a covenant, an agreement, so that there is no surprise somewhere down the road that needed to have been clarified earlier that can cause division and hamper the work of the new church, or serve as a discouragement to the sponsoring church. First, in a covenant, you're going to want to make sure that you cover doctrinal issues. Are the church planter and the new church in doctrinal agreement with each other and with the sponsoring church? Do they have a common statement of faith? Are there differences that both congregations can live with over non-essential matters, but have these issues been discussed? For Southern Baptists, it's always just a good idea to say, hey, the sponsoring church operates under the guidelines of the Baptist Faith and Message, and the new church needs to operate under these same guidelines. But whatever your denominational background is, make sure that you have clarified what those expectations are from the beginning. Similarly, you want to talk through methodological issues to make sure that you're going to be on the same page. Representatives of each congregation discussing the methods that the new church is going to use in evangelism, disciple making, and worship, so that there will not be conflict on the field. If you're sharing facilities, there needs to be an agreement between the two congregations concerning the use of these facilities. Who gets to use which room at what time? What state will it be in for the next user, to make sure that nobody's becoming angry because every time they walk in, the tables are in the wrong place, or they tried to have a meeting but somebody else was using that room. Agree on finances. Will the sponsor church actually be providing funds, as we just discussed, to help launch the new work, or are they expecting some kind of rent for the use of their facilities? When money is donated in the offering plate to the new church, who will be responsible for deciding how it is to be used? Issues of legal responsibility. Are there insurance liability questions to be considered? Has the new church filled out all the needed paperwork with the appropriate government offices? Is the church planter properly registered with Social Security? Are they making all of their appropriate payments, taxes, things like this? Is all of that above board? In terms of accountability, is the church planter a staff member of the sponsoring church? Does he need approval from the deacons before he can make decisions? Who actually is going to appoint the deacons for the new congregation? Will the sponsoring church appoint them, or will they be decided upon by the local congregation? Cultural issues need to be considered. This is often a huge problem in a cross-cultural church plant. Are members of the sponsoring church prepared for the different smells that are going to be coming from a shared fellowship hall if a church from a different culture is going to be preparing food? What about different attitudes towards the supervision of children? Is there a translator, if needed, who can help mediate misunderstandings and talk through some of these issues? On the website, there's a sample covenant for you to consider. It's an actual covenant between a sponsoring church and a mission church, just to give you an idea of the kinds of things that could be included, and you can adapt that for use as necessary. So hopefully that will be helpful. Also, here are some points to ponder. This is going to be a forum, so after you've had a chance to think through these questions, you've read through the assigned reading in the textbook, I want you to pop onto the forum and answer these questions. How can a sponsoring church be prepared? What is the value of a well-prepared sponsor to a mission? What is the value of a well-prepared sponsor to a mission pastor? How does being prepared help a sponsor church? How can the resources of a sponsor church other than money be used? And how can and why should the mission pastor and mission church keep the sponsor church informed? I look forward to seeing your answers. If you want to discuss any of this further, either in person or over the phone or through email, as you know, I'm always available. Please let me know what your thoughts, questions are, pushback, any insights that you have. I look forward to learning from them and hope that you're enjoying the course and that you're finding it helpful. God bless. Well, hopefully that's given you some key insights into how a sponsor-church relationship works. If you are going to be planting a church, what do you need to provide for your sponsor? If you're going to sponsor a new church, what do you want to make sure you have in place so that the work can be done the most effective way possible? Hope that's helpful. See you in the next session.